Welcome to the Law Firm Growth Podcast, where we share the latest tips, tactics, and strategies for scaling your practice from the top experts in the world of growing law firms. Are you ready to take your practice to the next level? Let's get started.
All right, so I want to go ahead and dive in depth into this whole concept of the 5 levels. And I know I mentioned this a little bit in the earlier one, but to really kind of dive in and see what we're going here to. So I mentioned in the first video that this is something that it's really funny. I originally saw this on a marketing webinar that was being put on by Perry Marshall, who's a guy that I used to respect. I mean, I still respect him, but he was a guy that I drew from a lot in the AdWords days. He's probably on the Mount Rushmore of Google AdWords and has been for a really, really long time. But anyways, early guy that I used to look into a lot, and this was on one of his webinars. And it was kind of a throwaway concept, but I really latched onto it. And I think it's one of the better frameworks that I've seen for kind of this journey that everyone goes from on, going from a solo practitioner of any sort to the point where you are, theoretically on this level 5, kind of the master of the universe, so to speak. I'm trying to do my air quotes, but my background isn't working out. But anyway, so basically, these 5 different levels are not necessarily things that people move to in, lockstep, and it's not a ratchet. You don't move up. As a matter of fact, people will spend different time on different levels. So, and I'm going to get into a little bit more depth, but basically the 5 levels overall are personal, how you're managing your personal productivity. Once you have your personal, but again, these are kind of considered stacked on each other. So you need to have the command of one. In general, the command of one is what allows you to move to the next level. So starting off with personal productivity, I'll go into some crazy examples of this. Going on to the particular skill that you are good at. And again, there are numerous different skills that one can have, but within the microcosm of this is kind of one specific thing. Going to managing others. And again, every skill, every level will encompass the previous 2. So skills are determined on your personal stuff. Your management of people with skills is built upon your own understanding of the skills. And then finally going to the executive level where you're not directly managing people, but you're managing people who manage people. And then finally getting to the point where you're an investor. Investor doesn't necessarily have to mean you're playing the stock market. The investor can be the chairman of the board or the person who's making the big calls. You're watching the trends. You're determining what the executives do. And again, this isn't something that you'll typically see at a lot of, I would even say the 7-figure level for most law firms. I think most people pretty much aspire to the point where they're executive. If you really delegated yourself entirely out of the entire management, if you've hired a CEO for your law firm and you're just kind of chilling out, that's pretty much the investor level. It's something that some people aspire to, but it is actually pretty rare. Now, a couple of things to kind of keep in mind. There is this transference between the levels as far as what's required to go to the next. But basically, it can become really difficult to focus on stuff at the wrong level, right? So I'll give a couple of crazy examples, right? So let's say that you've gotten to the point where you've built your practice up, and there's actually a lot of movies about this. You've gotten to the point where you're successful, but all of a sudden you're an alcoholic, right? Or not all of a sudden, but you've developed a drinking problem. Now, this is going to actually, I would put that as something that is a personal problem that will make it really, really hard to fix things on the skill level and the management level. And again, this is, like I said, this is actually kind of a romantic notion and like a lot of, I guess this is what you describe as a Byronic anti-hero. But basically, it's very, very difficult to have a situation with personal problems because it can make people who are extremely skilled or extremely, successful, ultimately, the late mornings, missing appointments, not doing the right thing, making crazy calls is going to make it pretty much, the house of cards will fall because there's no foundation. And again, going to a slightly less ridiculous example, if you don't have a lot of organization, balls are being dropped because of your personal operating system, we'll get into a lot more depth about that, then it's really, really tough. You can have the best intentions, but you start missing meetings, you start not getting things delegated effectively between your team doesn't have these skills, it becomes very difficult to build things. Similarly, if you focus on things at the wrong level, then you can not really move forward on certain things. So let's say that, you're having an issue with your close rate. Now, if you're reading a bunch of books on, how to set company culture and, create value systems and all this different stuff, if you're a solo practice, that's not really what you need to focus on right now. And, there's enough things in business to really distract you at any given time, but it's very, very important to focus on the right stuff for your level. You can prepare, but in terms of getting to the actual level, it is generally going to be focused at the level that you're currently constrained by, that's going to actually move you up the needle, right? So that's basically that. The other thing is that there is kind of a transference, right? So I'll give an example with myself right now. So over the last couple of years, I went from, I went from Jan the AdWords consultant, which was skill. And eventually we ended up building up our skill sets, to Jan, the person who was managing our media buyers, to now the point where we have, over the last year, I've actually gotten middle management in place for a lot of Case Fuel, and I'm generally in the executive level. That being said, I'll jump down to a sales call often, right? And if we have a situation where somebody's on vacation, or we have to change a team member or something like that, I can get knocked down to the skill level pretty quickly, right? If there's situations where the same thing at the manager level. So again, I like to talk about stuff, and we have been in the process. So I'm generally floating between these two things, because I'm also a manager of my managers, right? So it's like kind of the situation is that. If you want to say where we're going to be in 5 years, the more time that I'm spending on this stuff is probably the farther we're going to go. And again, like I said, I'm not immune to any of this stuff too. If I start screwing off and, playing video games at 2 p.m. in the middle of the day, or, maybe I develop a drinking problem. I'm trying not to, but I'm kidding. I'm sober for the last little bit. But anyway, then, we're probably not going to be as far. So generally your time is the highest leverage, the higher up you are in this thing. So it's something to strive for. But basically, I found this a really, really useful model too, because like I said, I think there's this quote that I really like, is that most growing businesses don't go bad out of starvation, they go bad out of indigestion. And we're talking about the indigestion of things to do, especially the smaller you are, the more vulnerable you are to this. You really need to make sure that you're focusing on the right stuff at the right levels. So I'm going to actually tag these things within this operations section on where I think they are on the level. And then we're going to kind of go ahead and build this stuff from the ground up. And then also, to kind of mention too, a lot of these things too, it is super important to understand these things too. Again, even if you're at one of these higher levels, you need to kind of understand the building blocks in order to get that. But we will be on to the next section with that.
Thank you for listening to the Law Firm Growth Podcast. For show notes, free resources, and more, head on over to casefuel.com/podcast. Looking forward to catching up on the next episode.